What is up, gamers, Twitter thugs, and social media reprobates? I'm Sean Fox, you're watching PlayStation News Now, your source of news, rumour, reviews, and video game discussion. You can follow us via Twitter, FoxGotGame at PlayStation News Now, as seen in the bottom right of your screen. And I do apologise if there's any background noise. I am not recording in our usual facilities today. But in today's news, Lara Croft fans, all those patiently waiting for the PlayStation 4 version of Square Enix's latest entry into the Rise of the Tomb Raider series, may be pleased to know that the rumour, which stems from the official side of Gamestop Italy, indicates that the game will be released on October the 11th. This year. Now, adding further fuel to the rumour, an official image had been released representing the company's database, where you can clearly see the aforementioned PlayStation 4 version with the release date. Now, the side of the store, GameStop Italy, has been updated and added to its sales list the version for PlayStation 4 Rise of the Tomb Raider. So, fans eager to play Rise of the Tomb Raider can breathe a sigh of relief, especially after the recent rumours that this version had been cancelled. And October the 11th is not too long a wait, so hang in there. And while we're on the subject of rumour, a rather exciting rumour has hit the ether of the internet regarding a possible Dead Rising PlayStation 4 Remaster. Now, Dead Rising is arguably the best in the series, so if the rumour rings true, I would certainly be on board. Now, the source of the rumour came from the PlayStation Trophy website Exophase, confirming Dead Rising 1 will be coming to PlayStation 4. Now, the trophies listed are definitely for a PlayStation 4 version. Interestingly, the first Dead Rising was never ported to a PlayStation platform, as it was an exclusive Xbox 360 release way back in 2006. So let's hope there is some substance to the rumour, and we'll keep you updated if and when we learn more. And super talented studio Insomniac Games received a compliment from publisher Square Enix President Yosuke Matsuda, who was apparently shocked by the high quality of the PlayStation 4 exclusive Spiderman game, and was equally surprised by Sony Santa Monica Studios' God of War. Now, the story comes by way of JewelShockers.com, who in turn sourced it via the weekly Famitsu Japanese online magazine. So, apparently Square Enix President Yosuke Matsuda is a real gamer, as he has demonstrated multiple times, and he isn't shy about showing off his gameplay online, as he often mentions in his appreciation for Western games. Now, in an interview in the latest issue of the weekly Famitsu magazine, he talked about E3 and the games that impressed him the most. And Matsuda-san mentioned that the games shown at E3 were simply amazing, and in particular he was surprised by God of War and shocked by the quality of Insomniac Games' PlayStation 4 exclusive Spider-Man game. He also talked about E3 in general, mentioning that he feels that the show is at a turning point, with many publishers keen on making their announcements before the show. Often E3 is used as a venue to convey follow-up information, and it's important to rethink on the best way to deliver the news to customers, while taking advantage of the visibility of the trade show. For instance, live streaming gameplay footage is something Matsuda-san sees as effective. He even took part himself to broadcast about Hitman, during which he played the game live. Brilliant there. And in other news, Amy Hennig's Star Wars game gets new images and info, and the creative process is similar to the Uncharted games. Now, Amy Hennig, if you're not aware, was a previous employee at Naughty Dog. There's a lot of politics involved, but she is now working over at EA in a new studio. Now, during a panel at Star Wars Celebration Europe at the Excel London Exhibition Centre, creative director Amy Hennig talked about her upcoming Star Wars game developed by Visceral Games. Now, the game is a long way off, coming in 2018, and it doesn't even have a name for now. But the team is writing an original Star Wars story with new characters, new locations, creatures, and tech, and it has to sit authentically aside the rest of the Star Wars lore. So the studio is working very closely with the folks over at Lucasfilm, and this kind of partnership is critical. Ennig mentioned that it's so early that the team probably shouldn't even talk about the game yet, but people are so curious that the team wants to talk at least about the process and where they are at. Now, during the talk, she showcased a few pieces of artwork and explained that they now include a lot of clues, inviting fans to scrutinize them and speculate. and we're certain the internet has no problem with speculation. Now, according to Hennig, the creative process for the game is very similar to what she did with Uncharted. She explained that if you want to create a familiar classic, which in Uncharted's case was a pulp action adventure experience, you need to deconstruct the films so that you can reconstruct them in an interactive context as gameplay. Incidentally, when Hennig mentioned Uncharted, the crowd cheered and she commented, "Good, they'll like this game then." Now, the end goal for the new game is that by the time the players have finished playing, they'll feel like they really did play a Star Wars film. Hennig aims to get the structure right, include the act breaks and obstacles and the set pieces and all the components that make a true Star Wars game. She also wants to get the tone right, reproducing what co-writer Todd Stashwick calls breezy urgency, which Hennig elaborated as sort of a swashbuckling charm with humour and buoyancy, but at the same time there are stakes and jeopardy. Analysing the films, Hennig identified and distinguished them. They're always on ensemble stories. In Star Wars, the main characters are not particularly side characters, they're co-protagonists. The films are as much Han, Leia and Vader's story as they are Luke's. That tradition continues with Rebels and Rogue One, and the same thing will be true of Hennig's game. Part of what Hennig is doing is to enable that not just in the story but also in gameplay. It's not a lone wolf story, the main cast will be a coordinated ensemble acting in the moment and in parallel. Characters in the Star Wars movies are always outgunned and outnumbered, so they always have to be smarter than their enemies and they have to work together. Enabling that in gameplay is another challenge for Hennig's team, so that the player will feel really part of that experience. Now, after Xbox had demonstrated their willingness to enter into the 4K arena with the Xbox Scorpio and the fact that it will be VR compatible, it's more likely that Sony's looking into a different direction by actively working on their exclusive VR headset, the PlayStation VR. Now, PlayStation VR is set to release on the 13th of October this year for a price tag of around $399 or £349 in the UK. Now, the PlayStation VR is more likely a charm for Sony to efficiently promote their exclusive content. That is also the reason for the more powerful PlayStation Neo to exist. Now, according to an interview with Sony executive Mr. Masayu Ito, Sony is planning to continuously improve the performance of the PlayStation VR while continuously slapping on a low price tag, and everybody wants to get a low price entry into this new technology. Now, the key aim is for PlayStation VR to go wireless. Now, according to Mr. Masayu, who claims that going wireless with the PlayStation VR isn't quite possible with the current technology, but they are willing to make PlayStation VR headset go wireless in the future. And in our final news segment, some new information regarding PlayStation 4 Exclusive Days Gone has surfaced by way of Kathleen McLaughlin over at the Bulletin.com website. Now, in a recent interview with Sony Bend Studio concerning Days Gone, a third-person shooter game created by Sony Interactive Entertainment's Bend Studio. So Days Gone was previewed during the gaming industry's annual conference E3 in June, and since then, the extended gameplay demo posted on YouTube has accumulated 2 million hits, creative director John Garvin said. Now, in the works since 2012, Days Gone is the biggest budget project ever undertaken by the studio, he said, and there's a lot riding on its commercial success. Because of Days Gone, created for Sony's PlayStation 4, the studio's staff has grown from around 45 people to 103, and there are no plans to downsize after the release, the date of which has not yet been announced. In fact, Reese and Garvin said they're confident that the studio has plenty of work ahead of it and could even grow larger. Here's a quote: "We have a long-term plan, and if successful, Days Gone will not only immortalize Oregon's high desert, it will also further fortify Bend Studio's position in the world of game development." End of quote. Now, the studio, which has existed under different ownership and different names since the late 80s, is best known for creating the Siphon Filter series in the late 90s. Now, Siphon Filter did not become a household name because it received critical acclaim and is respected by gamers who prefer a third-person perspective in which the action figure is visible on the screen. Sony would not release sales data for Siphon Filter, but according to the game industry trade press, the first title in the 6-title franchise has sold about 1.7 million copies in the first year. Now, Sean Wellborn, owner of the game Quest used video game store in Bend, said he played most of the Siphon Filter games and recommended them to the customers. Now, it wasn't just a straightforward shooter, he said, there was some strategy to it. But much has changed in the gaming world since the late 90s. For starters, the budgets for so-called AAA games, the industry equivalent of some blockbuster movies, have become enormous. The AAA publishing business is a hit-driven one that requires massive investments, not unlike Hollywood productions, said James Brightman, editor-in-chief at GamesIndustry.biz, an online publication covering the industry. And with those investments, which range from around $40 million to $60 million before marketing, come high expectations for sales. Now, Bend Studio would not disclose the budget behind Days Gone, but Garvin said it's the largest he's ever worked on, and Reese said it's comparable to other AAA game budgets. Now, with no release date as mentioned, Days Gone does not have a retail price, but most newly released games cost around $60. So it's hard to know at this point what Sony expects from Days Gone in terms of sales. Gamers say that the release date will be telling, with a full release indicating that Sony wants Days Gone available to consumers in time for the Christmas holiday buying season. If other companies' benchmarks are any indication, Days Gone will need to sell at least 2 million copies in the first year, Brightman said. Nintendo said during a recent discussion with investors that it's aiming for at least 2 million copies for any new game. A few years ago, a Tomb Raider title sold more than 3 million copies, but the game's publisher Square Enix was disappointed because it hoped for 5 to 6 million copies. Brightman said, "I wouldn't be surprised if Sony had similar expectations for Days Gone." Now, Days Gone is being compared to other post-apocalyptic and zombie genre games, and Garvin, who is responsible for the concept, admits that he was inspired and influenced by the hit zombie television show The Walking Dead, as well as the movie World War Z. Garvin doesn't think the zombie genre is any more played out than, say, superheroes or romantic comedies. He was drawn to it because of the stories it can inspire. Here's a quote. "It allows you to create a world that has instant danger and where the pressures are so great that it sort of pushes people to the limits of what they're capable of." End of quote. Garvin also said he was also inspired by the biker gang television show Sons of Anarchy. Now, the main character in Days Gone is a former outlaw biker gang member named Deacon St. John, who somehow survived the pandemic that killed most of the other people and turned others into bloodthirsty bad guys called Freakers. Days Gone will set itself apart from many angles, starting with the narrative, Garvin said. Deacon's family is dead, his friends are gone, yet he fights to survive. So why the struggle? Garvin said the answer is in the game. There is a huge story in this game. Most post-apocalypse shooting games take place in an urban wasteland. Garvin said he knew that the natural beauty of the native state would create an interesting contrast to the game's dark theme. Now, the Bend Studio settled on the concept, character and environment early in the creative process. Now, the next hurdle was to take advantage of the latest available technology and the size and complexity of the freaker horde that make the gamer really have a strange encounter in Days Gone, which is unlike anything available on the market so far. Incidentally, the footage shown at E3 was running on a standard PlayStation 4. Garvin said the credit goes to the longtime Bend Studio engineer Norman Chang. Now, here's a quote. "He's the one who was literally able to put together the physics code that allows us to have that many objects that are all animating and all have AI, artificial intelligence, all doing their thing and colliding with the environment. That's not an easy task." End of quote. Another technical feature of Days Gone is that it will instantly render changes to the weather or time of day. In other words, a player can choose to send Deacon out on a night mission and see day fall to night before his eyes. Days Gone is an open world game, which many players can explore the environment as they choose. Garvin, who grew up in Medford and studied Shakespearean literature at the University of Oregon, also populated the game with motifs from Oregon history. He said he made sure to include an old wigwam burner, a silo-like structure where the sawmills used to burn sawdust. While a lot of the work went into Days Gone narrative, it also has plenty of gore and violence. As Garvin played the game on a giant flat-screen TV in his office, Deacon encountered a freaker lurking behind the wigwam burner. When the creature attacked, Deacon pulled a sawed-off shotgun off his back and blew his head off. That's our game, Garvin said with a laugh. So, Days Gone is stocked with what gamers call contextual kills, which means they can use the environment, not just their weapons, to defeat the enemy, Garvin said. Now, during the extended gameplay trailer, Deacon walks through an old sawmill fighting off freakers and impels one of them against a large saw blade. Even if gamers don't find Days Gone to be the most original or mind-blowing title ever released for PlayStation 4, they might buy it for reliability. Glitches have become so common in games today that it's almost as if publishers have stopped trying to release a finished product, said Walbaum, the owner of GameQuest. That was never the case with Bend Studio's Siphon Filter, he said. Bend Studio is one of several game development studios that Sony owns. It was founded by computer game makers Mark Blank and Mike Berlin in the late 1980s. They hired Reese as a programmer in 1993 and changed the name to Eidetic. Sony, which had hired the studio to develop Siphon Filter, then acquired it in the year 2000. Bend Studio has a reputation within Sony for producing titles that showcase the company's proprietary consoles and doing so in a reliable way, Reese said. Before going to work on Days Gone, Bend Studio created Uncharted: The Golden Abyss for the launch of PlayStation Vita, a portable gaming device that, according to Reese, influenced the design of PlayStation 4. More recently, Bend Studio has helped evaluate PlayStation VR, the virtual reality headset for PlayStation 4, due out on October 13. Here's a quote. "It's important to have really good, solid teams that can deliver on projects, deliver on schedule, and deliver a good product, and we're one of those teams." And that's where the article ends. Now, the more I learn about Days Gone, the more pumped I am to experience the game. This article, which I'll link for your perusal, is filled with some really interesting stuff indeed. So what is your opinion on any of today's news and topics? Be sure to let us know in the comments, won't you? Bringing us to the end of another video. If you enjoyed the content, go ahead and hit the like button, and thanks to all who kindly share our videos, helping us to reach more PlayStation fans and gamers in general. And of course, subscribe for more news, reviews, and always video game discussion. So until next time, play games, not corporations. Thanks for watching, everybody.